Sacre Bleu. It's time for the arc. Salutations and welcome, horse racing fans. I'm your host for Countdown to Keeneland. My name is Matthew DeSantis, and you can find me on Twitter at the handle at Failed to Menace. Just want to welcome everyone to another episode of Countdown to Keeneland, where we are getting you ready for the big weekend in horse racing. That's right, the Breeders' Cup at Keeneland, the first weekend in November. We're getting closer and closer to that. There's a crispness in the air that lets you know fall is here. It's sweater weather. Some of you who drink coffee, it's that pumpkin spice latte type of year and season. And listen, that means we're getting closer and closer to the Breeders' Cup. So what are we going to be doing on this show today? We're going to be recapping the Breeders' Cup prep races from last weekend. We're then going to be previewing the Breeders' Cup prep races for this coming weekend and giving you some news related to the Breeders' Cup. Now, when I say Breeders' Cup prep, I don't just mean any old stakes race. I'm referring to the Breeders' Cup win and you're in races. So the races that give you an automatic invite to the Breeders' Cup. Those are the ones that we're going to be focused on in this show. That's not always the biggest races on the card, but we got you covered for anything you might be interested in. Check out all the great content. Make sure to like and subscribe. Trust the profits. And make sure to follow me on Twitter at the handle at Failed to Menace. Okay, well, let's recap a big week from last week. And I just want to say, first of all, shout out to everybody I met at Parks. I was up for the Pennsylvania Derby. It was a great time to see everybody up there. I got to meet a lot of people on Twitter. Shout out Tom from Tom and Tom Racing, Matt, obviously, and Megan. Always great to see both of them. Got to see Sean, got to see a bunch of other great people, and it was just a blast being up there for Parks. Got to see Jessica Paquette and Andrew Philly Boy, and it was just great. So we loved having it. It was perfect weather. Hope you made a little bit of money on that. Hope you enjoyed the great racing. I'm a native of Pennsylvania, so always exciting to see my big, my home state show out on a big day. But those were not as many implications as there might have been to the Breeders' Cup, with obviously the result of Tabo winning the Pennsylvania Derby, Society winning the Cotillion. Those were not Breeders' Cup win and you're in races. So let's take a look at where those Breeders' Cup win and you're in races took place last week. And the answer is overseas. They were only two last week. As if you remember, the Juddmonte Royal Lodge Stakes was one of those. And this was a 4-horse field, which is incredibly rare over in England. You don't see that very often, but it was a 4-horse field won by the horse The Foxes. A horse that I love that name. I love that it's a proper noun as well. So The Foxes wins, Andrew Balding trained horse. And like I said, a 4-horse field. And listen, I think we've watched enough small field sizes here in the United States, whether it be Saratoga over this past summer, whether it be something like Santa Anita, whether it be even your local tracks like Penn National or Assiniboia. I love both those tracks, but reality is a lot of times you're looking at 5, maybe 6 horses in most of those fields. Small field sizes can sometimes, particularly 4 horses, can sometimes lead to fluky results. And I don't want to take anything away from the Foxes, but it does have a feel as if this was a race where everybody was really bunched up the whole time around. Nobody was able to make a sweeping move of any type. But much credit to the Foxes, who kind of angled down inside. Those last couple of furlongs really made a nice move on the inside, pulled ahead. And the real big news out of the Juddmonte Royal Lodge was the loss of Highest Honors. Highest Honors was the odds-on favorite, the overwhelming favorite in this field. Really seemed to flatten out. It was interesting. If you watch that race, there was one point about a half furlong out. It looked like Highest Honors kicked into another gear and was going to go flying past everybody, and then just kind of flattened out and really did not continue. Didn't look like there was any issues with traffic. Obviously, with only 4 horses, he was splitting horses, but it didn't look like it was that big of a ask to go between. Looked like there was plenty of room there. So interesting. The horse didn't really respond to that point. So Highest Honors, not the last you're going to hear from him. The Foxes certainly gets that invite, along with, as you saw up here, Auguste Rodin and Mysterious Night, the Aidan O'Brien and Charlie Appleby horses, respectively, for the juvenile turf. The other horse that I'll say, there's only 4 horses in the field, but one of the other horses that I was impressed by was Dubai Mile, who was the leader. And Dubai Mile's got that big white face, big white blaze on the front. Reminds you a little bit of Shahama, who I got to see this weekend actually at the Cotillion at Parks. And, Dubai Mile really, I was impressed by, because a lot of times when you're leading a turf race, you have a tendency to fade a little bit. And a 4-horse field, it can be a little bit fluky. And Dubai Mile really hung in there, and I thought ran a really good race. I was impressed by that horse, but all credit to the Foxes and Andrew Balding for getting that automatic invite to the Breeders' Cup. Now, the fillies also ran last weekend and at Newmarket, and that was another win-in-your-in race, won by the favorite, Commissioning, trained by the legendary John and Thaddy Gostin. This was in the Rockfell Stakes, and Commissioning was the odds-on favorite. And what was, I thought, impressive, this was a much larger field. This was, I think, 16 horses. So you were really spread out, maybe even more than that. It might have been 18, but it was a huge field. And when you're in those fields, it's important. The turf course in England are much, much wider because they don't have turns. And so they're straightaways. And they don't all have straightaways, but this one was. And so it was a very, very wide turf course. You can really spread out. And I think the smartest thing that Commissioning did was stay out of trouble, kind of stayed on, depending on your camera angle, the inside or the outside. From an American standpoint, we would consider it the inside because it's closer to where the wire is and that sort of thing, but and further away from the grandstands. But it stayed kind of on one side, was always had a path through, was never covered up, was never bunched behind, was sitting around 5th, 6th place most of that race. And what was impressive about Commissioning is this is not a horse where I was stunned by a turn of foot. Sometimes you'll see a horse just all of a sudden hit an accelerator and you'll go, oh, wow, that was, something else. So it wasn't that. But what you saw from Commissioning was just grinding away, just slowly but surely the class won out. And slowly but surely, Commissioning just keeps reeling them in, reeling them in, reeling them in, and then just extending. And so it was a very impressive effort. It was a very mature effort in a lot of ways because there wasn't this sudden turn of foot and now you're 5 lengths clear of the field. It was just a grinding effort in some ways. And like I said, I was very impressed by that. I thought Electric Eyes and Rage of Bambi ran well underneath. Rage of Bambi's horse I talked about last week that I thought would give you good odds potentially underneath, and certainly a very valuable horse. I think one that has a bright future, actually. But all credit to Commissioning, John and Thaddy Gostin. That John Gostin barn is rather deep, and you have great horses like Inspiral and others that he trains. So going to see a lot more of Gostin for the Breeders' Cup. But for the juvenile Phillies turf, we have Commissioning in the Breeders' Cup. Well, let's transition from recapping to actually previewing. And this is a loaded weekend. Let me just say that, a loaded weekend of races. There are so many. I believe there are 11 Breeders' Cup win-in races this weekend. Now, we're not going to go through all of them. We're going to go through the ones here in the United States. We are going to hit one, as I mentioned in the open, the ARC. We are going to hit the ARC as well, which is a Breeders' Cup win-in race at the end. So we're still going to give you that international flair. We're not going to go through that entire ARC card. There are, I think, 5 ARC races that day at Longchamp that are Breeders' Cup win-in races. We're not going to go through all 5 of those. We are going to hit the ARC, which is the big one. But we'll start with one of the big juvenile races here in the United States. And by the way, gotta give a listen to Vinny and Colin. They're starting a new show, Kentucky Derby Prep. We're already getting ready for that. And looking at some of these 2-year-olds that are coming up, they're doing a great job with that. So make sure to check that content out on Trust the Profits. But the Champagne is one of those races for 2-year-olds. You remember last year, Jack Christopher won. This is a race recently won by Jackie's Warrior, Frenzy Fire, Tis the Law. It's interesting. This race often is looked at as kind of the prep race for the Breeders' Cup, for the FanDuel Juvenile. but it's produced more sprinters in recent years, because a lot of times then the FanDuel Juvenile as well, these are the early favorites for the Kentucky Derby. We obviously saw how that did not work out this past year, but a lot of these horses ended up being more sprinters, or one-turn milers, or one-turn 7 furlong or 6 furlong horses like a Jackie's Warrior, like Jack Christopher, like Firenze Fire. Tis the Law, kind of the exception of a Triple Crown winner, or winning one of those Triple Crown races. So let's talk about this field, and we got to start, I think, with Andiamo a Frenzy, and I can do that because I'm Italian, so I can kind of do a caricature imitation of that. But Andiamo a Frenzy is half to Firenze Fire. It has the same dam as Firenze Fire, so obviously that, I think, plays into how we think about this race a little bit. Andiamo a Firenze, I thought, has run very, very well. Finished a very strong third at the Sanford, was taking a lot of money that day. Very impressive maiden victory. Came back, won at the funny side at 6.5 furlongs. Won that one really going away. Track was a little bit moist that day, so there were moisture in the track. So they, maybe you discount that a little bit. But I thought Andiamo a Firenze was very impressive there. And this is a horse that I think is going to be able to get this distance. I don't know about going longer than the 1-turn mile, but I think that for this particular race, I think this sets up nicely for Andiamo a Firenze. Really like this horse a lot for trainer Kelly Breen. But hardly the only one you can see. We have Mike Maker, Brad Cox, Danny Gargan, Chad Brown, Steve Asmussen. We have some big names in here. Let's shift next to Verifying. This is a Brad Cox horse that's only actually had a maiden win, but it did beat, and it's interesting. One of the things I do when I look at these 2-year-olds is I go back and look at those maiden races and see how the second, third, and fourth place finishers did in follow-up races. One of the things I noticed about Verifying is that race that he won has not come back super strong. And what I mean by that is Trackmate, who finished second to Verifying in that maiden special weight, comes back, finishes fourth while stretching out next time out. Not great. Didinger, who finished third in that race, comes back, finished second actually just this past weekend. I actually watched that horse because he ran in the first race of the Pennsylvania Derby Day card, finished second, pretty distant second, but a second place at Parks in another maiden effort. So it's not produced any next out winners. Now, the 2 horses he beat didn't flop the next time out, but again, you would like to see some next out winners sometimes coming from those maiden special weight races. So Verifying, listen, Brad Cox, you always have to take seriously. He's going to get these 2-year-olds ready, but sometimes he also lets them run into shape a little bit. Cyberknife was a late developing horse. Mandaloon was a little bit of a late developing horse. I mean, so some of these horses aren't always geared up and ready to go right away. So we'll just have to see. Blazing Sevens, the Chad Brown horse, broke a maiden against a good field. Bourbon Bash actually came back to win next time out. Then Blazing Sevens ran third at the Hopeful. Now, granted, that was a pretty distant third. And you could say conditions might be a little bit of an issue that day. It was a sloppy track. And so it was, maybe you discount that and you go, well, maybe he ran well or better, worse, better or worse based upon those conditions. But there were some track issues. So shouldn't have any issues. I know a lot of the Eastern Seaboard is getting hit this week with the hurricane remnants up and down the Eastern Seaboard. Looks like the weather in New York is going to be okay for the Champagne. And then the final horse I'll mention here is Steve Asmussen's Gulfport. And I'll be honest, this horse for me, this horse just burns a lot of money, I think, already. I mean, this horse has been a heavy favorite in 2 straight races and come out and run second both times. Lost to Damon's Mound 2 out ago, lost to Forte last time out. I would just say be very careful of betting Gulfport. That does not seem like the most reliable horse out there. Andiamo a Firenze from the inside. I don't love the inside, but I don't hate it maybe quite as much. I think this horse has good tactical speed, could use that. But should be an exciting race to see who's going to make their way to the FanDuel Juvenile from this particular field. So this is a big weekend at Aqueduct, or should I say Belmont at Aqueduct, the BAQ initials and the whole 9 yards. But one of the other races is the Miss Grio, and this is for the juvenile fillies turf. And so this is a mile and 16th on the turf, and you'll see another rather small field. You have a 6-horse field here, but I think there are some intriguing horses. There's some nice recent winners of the Miss Grio. You look at a horse like Plum Ali, Lady Eli, McCulloch even finished third last year. I mean, so this produced some nice horses the last couple of years. Now, this year's crop, a couple of horses I would encourage you to look at. One, Pleasant Passage. This is a Shug McGahee filly, won the maiden, going the distance, a mile and a 16th on the turf. I just always love Shug McGahee horses. And when Shug horses fire off first time out as 2-year-olds, really like that. Really like, Shug tends to be very cautious with a lot of horses, and he tends to really kind of slowly progress. And the fact he's moving this horse up to the Miss Grio after one win, I think is a little bit telling. I think there's some talent here with Pleasant Passage. Really like this horse quite a bit. I'm Just Kidding, another horse from John Kimmel that I want to draw your attention to. This is a Justify baby. Justifies have been doing extremely well this year. One of the top freshman sires, I shouldn't say freshman sires, one of the top sires. And like I said, doing very well. I'm Just Kidding. The other reason I like it, one second time out on the turf. So first time was on dirt, then goes to the turf, wins that effort like that. The only problem is here you're stretching out from 5.5 furlongs to over a mile. That said, pedigree suggests with Justifying with the female side as well, this is not going to be an issue, the stretching out. But certainly if you're looking to just bet 2-year-old pedigree, those Justify babies have been doing really, really well. Georgie Spirit, the Jorge Abreu horse, filly, I should say. This is another one I like. Won a maiden first time out on the turf. Will also need to stretch out. But the reason I like this, Abreu is the owner and trainer. I sometimes like zeroing in on those horses because it tells you sometimes the trainer has a pretty high opinion of this horse. Also is going to make sure they place this horse in the right spots when they themselves are the owners. And so I always like looking for those owner-trainer combinations sometimes. Can't look past a Chad Brown horse on the turf, no doubt about it, but Free Look, Chad Brown filly from breaking from the inside, won a maiden special weight in the second start, also going the mile and 16th distance. Interesting, the fast time, minute 42 for the one for mile and a 16th, which is roughly the same time as Pleasant Passage ran in her maiden effort. So pretty strong. Now, here's the thing, contradict that or compare that, if you will, to Be Your Best. Now, Be Your Best, the Horacio de Paz horse, very good horse, 2 for 2 in his career, won a non-graded stakes race. Both of those races were at 8.5 furlongs. But you look at the final time, 144, 145, a little bit slower. Now it's New York turf, so good Lord, anything over 3 miles an hour seems like they're going to get a speeding ticket up there. I mean, they go 25 and 50 for the opening quarter and half, and that's, everybody knows it. And it's one of those things where, but I do like to look at those final times to go, what was the pace like here? What's going to happen if there's a little bit of a stronger pace, maybe going against a better competition? Be Your Best. I'm not saying to fade that horse, but I'd have some worries when there's like a 3-second difference in some of those mile and 16th early races. And maybe a horse like Free Look and Pleasant Patches just have more natural speed to be able to pull away late. And then Alluring Angel's an interesting horse as well. Another Jorge Abreu horse. This is a horse that's stretching out from 6.5 furlongs, where she won a stakes race at Kentucky Downs. So has a lot of class. Again, another horse that's 2 for 2 in her career. Finished second at that stakes race at Kentucky Downs. So 1 win in the maiden, second in a stakes race, but still horse you have to take seriously, but should be a lot of fun to watch how the Miss Grio turns out. So let's go to the Frisette, one of my favorite names. This is actually the next day. So we have the Pilgrim and the Frisette the next day, and this is for the NetJets juvenile fillies. And you see a nice field of 8 here, and we're not going to run through all 8, but we're going to hit a couple of these horses. So Leave No Trace, the Philip Serpy horse. This is a horse that is breaking from the inside, but this is a horse that won the Grade 1 Spinaway last time out at Saratoga, won at a 14-1. So this is a horse I really like at that price. And this is, obviously you're not going to get that price this time out, but I think you're still going to see this horse maybe not respected entirely because the connections aren't there. This is not a Bill Mott horse. This is not a Todd Pletcher horse. Even a Cherie DeVaux horse. That's Philip Serpy, who is a very, very good trainer, but may not have the national name recognition that some of these other trainers do. So I wouldn't be surprised if Leave No Trace gets a little disrespected again, but 2-for-2 lifetime, Uncle Mo background, love the pedigree there, and so excited to watch Leave No Trace run. American Rocket, I really like this horse a lot. Was fourth in the Spinaway, but has the same dam as Frank's Rocket, who actually finished second in this race 2 years ago. And this is a horse that American Pharaoh Baby, we talked about the Justify Babies a little bit ago. The American Pharaoh Baby's also doing well. Won a really nice maiden over Determined Jester. Why might you remember that name? Well, Determined Jester actually came back and won the Rosie Stakes at Colonial the next time out on turf. So that was, granted, beat Determined Jester on dirt. Determined Jester switches surfaces, but shows that beat a horse with a lot of class, at the very least. The horse came out and won a stakes race the next time out. So I thought that was impressive from American Rocket. Like I said, fourth in the Spinaway, not bad, but we'll need to obviously improve a little bit. But Bill Mott, one of those trainers I just happen to trust in these spots a lot. Chocolate Gelato. This is a horse that lost its debut and broke its maiden at 6 furlongs. Is going to need to stretch out. That shouldn't be an issue. This is a horse that is impeccably bred. Sire from Practical Joke. The filly is from, or the mare is from Candy Ride. So this is a very, very good horse. This is a Todd Pletcher and Rispoli owned horse, and you can expect big things, I think, from Chocolate Gelato. But this is a horse that might even need more distance, more than just a mile. Will like more distance, and interesting to see what it does. Obviously, in these 2-year-old races, you're never quite sure about everything. The Great Maybe, I think, which is a great name for a 2-year-old horse, actually, because that's kind of where we are right now with the juvenile division, the Great Maybes. But this is a Cherie DeVaux filly. I know she's really high on this horse. Should also like the distance, has that AP and Indy lineage. So excited to see that horse win 1-for-1 in its career at 6 furlongs with the winning its maiden. And Hot Little Thing, this is a horse that's coming from Rudolph Brissett, but is coming in from Indiana, broke its maiden and won a stakes there, stretching out though. But get this, out of a dam from Aladar. That's right. The dam is out of from Aladar. So, people who like horse racing history, that's always fun to trace lineages back to those great horses of the 1970s. And then finally, Viderio is Butch Reed filly, broke its maiden at Parks, ran in a grade 3 at Saratoga and finished 5th, but then came back at a non-graded stakes effort and won at a mile at Monmouth. So Viderio might not get a lot of action on the board. That's a horse I'd be interested in using underneath in this particular race. Well, let's move on to the Pilgrim, which is, and I should say this is a list of probables for the Pilgrim because these are races that are on Sunday. And this is a race that's produced some, I think, pretty nice horses the last few years. Annapolis winning, Fire at Will, 40 Under, all really good horses. Even horses like Portfolio Company, Public Sector ran second the last 2 years. So you've seen some nice fields come out of the Pilgrim. There's some form in terms of stakes experience. Again, I really like the Shug McGahee horse, Battle of Normandy. Broke its maiden at the distance at Saratoga. Finished second in the grade 3 with Anticipation last time out. So definitely like that class and keeping this horse in that stakes level competition. Lachase broke his maiden first time out, going 8.5 furlongs. Horse beat Provision, who ran second the next 2 times out. So possible that, Lachase beat a horse that's a little bit of a hanger. So keep that in mind when looking at that. That first effort was very good. But like I said, always like to see who those horses beat in those maidens and how they've come back subsequently. Again, I'm very busy. Chad Brown, filly on the turf, won its debut maiden. Third place horse came back to win a stakes race the next time out of Kentucky Downs, Reckoning Force. So that was a really nice maiden race in which the third place horse comes back, wins a stakes race next out. So you got to like to see that, and really speaks to the class of that I'm very busy one there. And then Major Dude is an interesting one. Again, this is the probables. Maybe this horse doesn't end up getting entered. This is a Todd Pletcher filly that's trying dirt for the first time. This is a Bolt Doro baby. Those Bolt Doros have been running very well, but primarily on the dirt. And so I'd be surprised if Major Dude draws into this field, but you never know. Pletcher obviously had Annapolis, and Annapolis won this race last year. And, then goes on to the dirt for a while and then comes back onto the turf and really has turned into a nice dirt horse. So, turf horse, I should say. So, just keep those things in mind. But I really like the Battle of Normandy. I think you might get a little bit more value. People always are going to bet down those Chad Brown horses quite a bit. So sometimes you can get some value in those other spots in the field. So let's shift away from New York and let's go to Churchill Downs, and let's go to the Yak Yak. And this is a race for the Big Ass Fans Dirt Mile. That's what this is an automatic qualifier for. And this is a race that's also produced some nice winners. Plainsman, Mr. Money, Awesome Slew, Tapiture. Some nice races, some nice horses in recent years. It's a nice field, deep field, a lot of talent here. Obviously, the name that's going to jump out is Speaker's Corner from trainer Bill Mott. The big question is, will Speaker's Corner bounce back from that disappointing effort at the grade 2 Pat O'Brien last time out? Here's the thing. I was one of those people who was very skeptical about what Mott did with Speaker's Corner this year, where Speaker's Corner just got completely blown out by Life is Good and Flightline. And I thought maybe that would have an impact on the horse's psyche and on the horse's efforts subsequently. And what we've seen is that horse went out west and finished fourth to a field that last year's version of Speaker's Corner, or even earlier this year's version of Speaker's Corner, would have easily won. So that's something I'm concerned by with Speaker's Corner. Now you're breaking from the inside. Now it's not too much of an issue. That mile shoot at Churchill, who knows what goes on down there. The camera angles are pretty wonky, but should have plenty of runway until they get into the main track. So it shouldn't be too much of an issue. But again, Speaker's Corner is a horse that 6 months ago, I would have looked at this field in Speaker's Corner and said, this is a horse that's going to go off at 1 to 5. It was just running at such a high level. Now it's taken some bumps. It's gotten some beaten. It's gotten beaten a few times. Now we'll see what ends up happening here. So you have to look at a few other horses in this field. Untreated. Nice horse. Feels like a potential underneath play. Gets a distance cut back, which I actually like quite a bit. That said, its best win ever was an allowance at Aqueduct, so this is going to be a step up in class. Folsom, I like this horse a lot. I think this is a horse that really good horse. Won a grade 1 won a grade 3, I should say, at the West Virginia Governors. Won that race. Won the Oaklawn Mile before that. So has success at the mile. Again, Brad Cox gets these horses ready. If Folsom, I think, definitely is a horse I'm looking at, very interested in potentially using up top if I'm interested in fading Speaker's Corner. 3 Technique is an interesting horse. I feel like this might be a slightly better version of Untreated to some extent. That might sound mean to say, but this is a horse that does get into the winner's circle maybe a little bit more often than Untreated. Best win was probably 3 back at the Knicks Go overnight, beating Injunction in South Bend. Those a nice field. Those are nice wins to beat Injunction in South Bend. So definitely like that. Silver Prospector has been a little disappointing lately. 3rd at the West Virginia Governors, 5th at the Cornhusker. Did win the Sexton Mile. Still, it feels like the last couple of races have been regressing, not moving in the right direction. Injunction is coming off a stakes win at Ellis Park. Always runs an honest race. I don't know. I'd probably use Injunction more underneath. The horse that I'm intrigued by is Senior Buscador. Senior Buscador turned in a really nice effort at the Pat O'Brien and is the only horse in this field that can say they beat Speaker's Corner because he actually finished 3rd in that race to Speaker's Corner's 4th. That was second back from a layoff. So you'd expect, that was the race for him to pop. And he popped pretty big. I also like cutting back to the 1 turn. I think that's kind of where he's going to do his best running. I would not sell this horse short. And depending on the price, I would absolutely be using this horse underneath on deeper exotics. And then finally, Twilight Blue. This is an interesting horse. 5 career wins, never worse than 2nd at Churchill Downs. Something to keep in mind, never worse than second at Churchill Downs. Some horses just love that Churchill Downs surface, and Twilight Blue appears to be one of them. Very nice horse, though. Didn't like the Rebel last year, but honestly, other than that one Rebel in 2021, horse hasn't run a bad race. So it seems to like distance, but has won at a mile and shorter. This will be a class test, no doubt about it. But again, at a price, Twilight Blue, I think, is an intriguing choice. So Twilight Blue, Senior Buscador, those are prices that I would keep an eye for. I think Folsom, if you're looking to beat somebody up top with Speaker's Corner, I like Folsom in that spot. Well, let's move on. Let's kind of keep moving out west. Let's keep moving. And so let's go to the Awesome Again Stakes. And this is an exciting field. This is obviously for the Breeders' Cup Classic. And this is kind of the same field that we saw in the Pacific Classic minus Flightline, right? So Flightline dominated that field. He's training. He's going to be going to the Breeders' Cup Classic. But now all of these other horses, this is another opportunity for them to get a win in your race. The biggest name here, obviously, Bob Baffert's Country Grammar, the horse that finished 19 and a half lengths behind Flightline in that Pacific Classic. Country Grammar, very, very accomplished horse on his own rights, won the UAE Derby, really a very, very good horse. So will likely be the odds-on favorite, overwhelming favorite. You see that there are several other Bob Baffert horses here. Interestingly, I don't really give many of them a chance. Azul Coast is a horse that I always felt like that was like his B or C horse, that never felt like his A horse, that never felt like that horse always felt like an afterthought in the Baffert barn a little bit. And so Azul Coast is coming back off a very long layoff, 10-month layoff. So I would expect maybe just use this horse to get, or use this race to get a little something into his foundation. High Connection is a really intriguing 3-year-old, actually beat Slow Down Andy before. It's a horse I like, was running against older, I think, for the first time. So High Connection is a horse. Again, this is a little bit of a test. We'll see how High Connection runs here. I wouldn't necessarily expect a ton. And then Defunded is a horse that's just not really in very good form right now. Finished 6th at the Pat O'Brien, finished 7th at the San Diego Handicap. I don't think we can really expect a ton out of Defunded in this field, considering he lost a lot of these horses, I should say, at the San Diego Handicap. Royal Ship, the Richard Mandela horse. Listen, I know he beat Country Grammar 2 out ago. I think he caught Country Grammar at the exact right time. That was Country Grammar's first start in North America after the Maidan. Even the ownership group admitted that Country Grammar was not all the way cranked up, and Royal Ship won that one. Outside of that race, you look at Royal Ship's form, and by and large, it's a very good form. It's very impressive, but it's more underneath. It's second, thirds. It's not a lot of firsts. So, again, Royal Ship, is this race going to set up super well for him? I'm not sure. In a way, if it doesn't set up well for him, then, if it sets up well for him, it sets up well for Country Grammar too. Tripoli's a horse that I don't know. That horse did not show a lot last time out, so I just have a hard time taking that one too seriously. I know you never want to fade John Sadler, but Tripoli is a horse I feel like just hasn't really been doing his best racing yet. Express Train is always a favorite. Second back from a pretty significant layoff. So I feel like you're going to see this horse's best effort in this race. I think if anybody's going to beat Country Grammar, it's going to be Express Train. I think the distance should work out nicely. 6 career races at this. 1.1 miles distance, only finished outside of the money once. So this is a horse that's very, very consistent. Definitely should be taken seriously. And then Slow Down Andy. I mean, this is an interesting horse, and it won. It's a multiple graded stakes winner on dirt. It won a grade 2 on turf last time out. It's a 3-year-old going against older. Very rambunctious horse in some ways. So, for Doug O'Neill, Slow Down Andy, do I think this horse is going to win? Probably not, but I don't know. I have a feeling this horse is going to run better than people think. This horse is going to outrun its odds, in my opinion. So, interesting field to see here from those West Coast dirt horses that are trying to qualify for the Longines Classic. But as I teased at the top, listen, this is ARC week, and there's a lot of great races that are taking place over at Longchamp. And this is a really thrilling field. And this is not the whole field, I should say. There is a list of 20 possibles. And it will get decided perhaps even the day of the race. There's going to be some rain. I know turf conditions are a concern for a few of these connections. I'll mention those as we go through. But I did want to include the most notable horses in this particular race. And obviously, some previous winners of the Arc, Turquator Tasso and Abel Treve, all horses that just really kind of put their name on the map by winning the Arc, which is the premier turf European race. And of course, one of the names you do not see here, two of the names you do not see here, are Baid and Adiyar. We'll have more on that later. But what we do have is a great group: Luxembourg, Mistral, Turquator Tasso, title holder, Alpinista, Vendini, Onesto, Westover, Dodus. Really, really good horses. Excellent horses. Luxembourg is a horse we've already talked about on here before. Aidan O'Brien horse, winner of the Irish Champion Stakes. Really improving 3-year-old. Now, Aidan O'Brien did say he's a little worried that the ground might get a little wet, a little soft for the potential rain, hoping to get good turf conditions for Luxembourg. But that last effort at the Irish Championship Stakes, very impressive, where he beat Mistral, who will be jockeyed this time by William Buick. This is a great horse. I do think it's fair to ask the question of whether or not Mistral may have lost of step. This is a horse that seems a little bit different, has not won a race since last August. Now, granted, this horse, all that Mistral does is run Group 1s. He runs against the very, very best. So in that regard, I totally get it. That's why you can go a year and a half and not win and still be among the favorites because you're running against the very, very best in the world. Always gives an honest effort, though. So I think you'll see a good effort from Mistral here, and certainly William Buick on board. Always to be taken seriously. Turquator Tasso was last year's upset winner at about 80-1. This was like Rich Strike winning for them over there. Kind of came out of nowhere, this German horse, and really backed it up by showing it was not a fluke. Got another Grade 1 win later in the year. Also had some very strong seconds, most recently at Ascot against Pile Driver, who's just a dominant horse. Turquator Tasso has demonstrated that last year's Arc was not a fluke. And this is a horse that will have no issue with the 1.5 mile distance, likes that distance, consistently runs at that distance. Now, the horse that I'm most interested in looking at is Alpinista, who's a mare, of course, and Alpinista has really nothing else to prove against her own sex, in that she is 7 for her last 7, winning, most importantly, 5 consecutive Group 1 victories. Incredible when you look at her record. So now she's going potentially up against the boys in mixed field. Alpinista, really rooting for her. A very amazing mare. See if she can do it here. But has all of her wins at this 1.5 mile distance as well. So we'll not have an issue at the distance. We'll see if she can handle the competition, but distance is not going to be the issue for this mare. She is a talented one. Vedini is a horse that was the favorite actually last time out at those Irish Championship Stakes. Maybe didn't get the best trip. Wasn't a bad one. Finished 3rd. One of the things here is this horse has never run longer than 10.5 furlongs. Now we're stretching out to 12 furlongs. I think it's legitimate to question whether or not Vedini can get the distance against this caliber of competition. The horse that I really like, kind of my upset pick, is Onesto. I love that horse going into the Irish Championship Stakes. Ran a really strong second to Luxembourg. This is a horse that has a Group 2 win. Most importantly, has a Group 2 win at 1.5 miles. Can do the distance. Onesto is a horse that's going to get better the more distance you go. This is also a horse that's still learning how to run. The Arc is only his 6th career race. So this is a horse that's ascending, getting better and better every time out. And then finally, title holder. A lot of people are going to be rooting for the Japanese horse. We always root for those horses, I think, because the Japanese trainers tend to do things the right way. Really have a lot of respect for these horses, the way they treat them, the way they train them, the way they point them and treat them at the different races. So definitely excited. This horse has won at 2 miles. This horse has won at 1 mile. This horse can go a lot of different distances and a lot of different paces. Excited to see title holder run. He's already won 1 win in your in race this year, so we'll see if he can add a second one to it and get Japan its first win ever at the Arc. So let's transition from recapping and previewing to a little bit of news. One, immediately after the Pennsylvania Derby, we did get confirmation from Bob Baffert that Taiba is headed to the Classic. I actually, something, I I liked Bob Baffert's quote. I like Bob Baffert's attitude regarding Flightline. He goes, I don't know if we can beat him, but we're coming for him. And I like that attitude. And I hope a lot of trainers have that attitude towards Flightline and that we don't end up with this very small field in the Breeders' Cup Classic. I hope we end up with a pretty full field for that race. And I hope people say, you know something, maybe we will run second to this horse, but dang it, we're going to go out there. We're going to give it our best. We're going to run our race. We're going to try to see if we can beat him. And I think that I have a lot of respect for anybody who puts a horse against a super horse like Flightline to for the fans, so we can see, so we can settle all these bets, we can settle all these scores, so we can see who's the best. And if nobody chooses to run, then okay, we know who's the best by default. But it's great to see everybody in the race and running. Obviously, Todd Pletcher has said life is good. We'll make that decision after the Woodward. That said, that Woodward Stakes has come back, I think, rather weak. It's a 5-horse field. It's hard to see Life is Good not winning that race. And so we'll see what Todd Pletcher says after that, whether or not he'll be pointed towards the Big Ass Fans Dirt Mile or instead the Classic with the showdown up front, at the very least, with Flightline. So one of the other big pieces of news from this past weekend was what a weekend it was for Gun Runner. Obviously, a great horse who has sired now many Breeders' Cup champions, actually. Echo Zulu, right? Last year's Juvenile Fillies champion. So Gunrunner had a day on Friday. He had Society win the Cotillion, grade 1. He had Taba win the Pennsylvania Derby, grade 1. He had 63 Caliber win a non-graded stakes race at Churchill. He had Gunite win a non-graded stakes race at Churchill. And he had Echo Zulu come back and win a grade 3 at Churchill. Incredible. 5 stakes winners in one day and one night within about 4 hours of each other. 5 stakes winners and 3 graded stakes winners in one day. Just an incredible sire. And just needed to sneak that in. It's not directly related to the Breeders' Cup, but just really incredible news. The other news I alluded to earlier was Adiyar and Baid. These two are skipping the arc. They are going to Ascot, which is also a win and you're in race. Of course, remember, this will be Baid's final race in his career, but really great to see Adiyar going there, challenging Baid. This is not going to be a walkover. This is going to be a real challenge. Adiyar is one of my favorite horses overseas. Baid, obviously, everybody's favorite, 10 for 10, perfect. We'll see going back to that mile how he runs, but should be a great way to finish out career, great way to watch those two go at it in a Breeders' Cup win and year-end race. And finally, the last little bit of news, and I don't want to end up on too much of a down note, but I do want to say that one of the reasons I do this show, and one of the reasons for those of you who follow me on Twitter, you know this, I love horses. As much as I love horse racing, as much as I love handicapping, as much as I love winning, money on bets, I love horses. I love the animals. I tend to try to do a lot for thoroughbred aftercare programs and try to donate money, try to raise awareness, etc. And so it was very disheartening over the last week or so, I think, to be a horse racing fan, to see the news coming out of parks on Pennsylvania Derby Day when trainers and jockeys and grooms were caught coming into parks with syringes, with drugs, with firearms. Now, granted, I'm glad security at parks prevented those people from participating in Pennsylvania Derby Day. That was good. So that part of it's good. The fact that the people were coming in with it, that's bad. And there's a black eye for the sport. You never like to see that. And then the other black eye that we have to be honest about is the news of Cezanne's passing. We didn't hear about Cezanne, who won over $3 million at the track. I mentioned earlier, horse was just such a really, really impressive horse and had run well very recently, but passed away almost 4 months ago. And nobody heard a peep about this. Nobody reported on this for such a long time. There were some whispers. I know some people made insinuations, but nobody, really came out and said anything until very recently. And it was really someone from kind of outside of the mainstream in the media that drew people's attention to it. And then finally people started paying attention. Oh, yes, this $3.6 million winning horse has died and nobody found out about it. These are the sorts of self-inflicted wounds that I hate seeing in horse racing. That said, there are so many good people in horse racing. There's so many good people trying to do the right thing, trying to improve the sport, try to make it better. whether whether or not you believe in HISA, which is the potential governing board, whether you believe in any of those things, the primary focus though is we need to try to do better for these horses. I think the Breeders' Cup is always a great opportunity to do that. And so, with that being said, make sure to continue to check out the Trust the Profits channel. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace. And I say that because we're going to be doing some fundraising. We're going to be doing some awareness for thoroughbred aftercare programs, not just here in the United States, but all across the world, to celebrate the international flavor of the Breeders' Cup. And we're going to try to, do our part to look after these horses, make sure they're well cared for on the track, off the track, and in retirement. So please know that no matter whether you win or lose bets based upon what I talk about on this show, please know that I am an advocate of horses, and we always want to try to do what's best for them here on the Trust the Profits page. Well, listen, folks, that's going to do it for today. This is a little bit of a longer episode. There's a lot to get through, and I do apologize for that, but I hope everybody has a great week at the track. And remember, until next time, it's now post time.